I want to extend a very warm welcome to you all. We're in for another wholesome and honest conversation today. Yes, it's 2022. The topic needs to be addressed. And how can we protect ourselves and others? And what can we do to change future generational attitudes to racism? My name is Donna. I'm your host in this 4-part series about anti-racism empowerment for women. I want to acknowledge the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation as traditional custodians of the land where we live, learn and play, and pay our respects to all Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to the land, sea and community. I also acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. During this podcast series, we will hear from 4 amazing women who have agreed to share their experiences of racism, from blatant hate speech to unconscious prejudices, how they deal with it, and their hopes for the future. Welcome to the Stories of Racism podcast series, Migrant and Refugee Women Speaking Out Against Racism. This podcast series is a partnership between Living and Learning Pakenham and Wellsprings for Women, aimed to empower diverse women of Melbourne to respond with a confidence to racism they encounter and to help build anti-racism resilience in their communities. Australia's racism has roots in its history of colonisation and migration, and until recent years, racist policies and practices were embedded within Australian laws and institutions. Everyday racism is alive and well in Australia, but do you know what it is, how it manifests, and how it affects people in our community? The definition of racism, according to Webster Dictionary, is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race, takes many forms and can happen in many places. It includes prejudice, discrimination or hatred directed at someone simply because of their colour, ethnicity or national origin. People often associate racism with acts of abuse or harassment. However, it doesn't need to involve any violent or intimidating behaviour. Take racial name calling and jokes, or consider situations where people may be excluded from groups or activities because of where they come from or their heritage. Racism can be revealed through people's actions as well as their attitudes, but sometimes it may not be revealed at all. Not all racism is obvious. For example, someone might look through a list of job applicants and decide not to interview people with certain names. Racism is more than words, beliefs and actions. It includes all the barriers that prevent people from enjoying dignity and equality because of their race. What exactly is this podcast about? Women Won't Be Silent.
I think women of colour are too humble when it comes to rejoicing and sharing our victories, but we allow our pain and suffering to be documented by others and fail to actually embrace our greatness.
You are the storytellers who have experienced racism and how debilitating it can be on your well-being. But also, where did you find your voice to tackle these issues? And how are we as a nation addressing it? Why is this conversation important? I understand this topic can be very challenging, and I'll try to get the conversation animated and inspirational by reflecting on our resilience as women of cultural background.
My next guest is the founder and creative director of Dreamtime Art Creative Consultancy, who are a proud member of Kinaway Chamber of Commerce, certified supplier of Supply Nation, consortia partner of Indigenous Defence and Infrastructure Consortium, licensed user for Aboriginal art on canvas, acknowledgement plaques of the Australian-made logo, signatory to the City of Melbourne Indigenous Art Code of Practice, and member of the Aboriginal Art Association of Australia. She also performed in community theatre, short films, television commercials, modelled for runways, beauty pageants, and print advertising, and was a mentee of Lisa Chambers and is a volunteer of the Filipino Community Council of Victoria. I met Fatima recently at the RMIT Incubator NFT Hackathon. She was a guest speaking and talking about Indigenous digital artwork and the disparity many Indigenous artists faced compared to their city cohorts. Listening to her explain about the representation of Indigenous art resonated with me, as our mob did everything through storytelling, food, singing, dancing, art and craft. It's our mana. It's the way we are. It was the only way our elders could pass on the knowledge to the next generation about who we are and what it means. Back to the NFT hackathon, you presented what I thought was a genuine representation of your culture through the amazing artwork. The questions of equality was raised. And personally, I was embarrassed because I didn't know what to say in an open sitting. I got to talk privately to understand their concerns and realised very quickly that they weren't aware of any of the underlying issues about native land and culture. And their understanding came from when they visited an Aboriginal community whilst on holidays with their family. My response was along the lines of, if you've lived the life of our fellow Indigenous men and women and understand wholeheartedly what we went through, then your opinion matters to me. Otherwise, your character and judgments are your own, which, to be frank, is very misleading. Welcome, Fatima. It's such an honour to have you on our show.
Well, thank you very much to yourself, Donna. It was almost serendipitous meeting you and speaking the topic that we were actually talking about that day. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land that I'm talking from today. It's the land of the Bunurong people. And I extend that acknowledgement to the lands of all of the Kulin here in Victoria. For many, many years since my family first immigrated here, we have enjoyed, the land, sea and sky of the Kulin primarily. So I do pay my respects to them and their ancestors and their connection to country. I also pay respects to my family, my husband and my children, who identify as Tamarang, the people of the mountains and rivers, they call themselves.
Beautiful.
And it is, if people are not familiar with Tamarang, it is where Mount Buller is, up in Yea, Kilmore side. So I pay my respects to them, because not only is my husband, Matthew Everett, leading the way, though he would never say leading, for me, he's leading the way when it comes to Aboriginal art and culture, but also I pay that acknowledgement to my children, because I know for them, it is the watching, the learning, the listening that they're doing with myself and my husband, that whatever tomorrow brings for them, we're hoping that they're going to be equipped with the right words and the right tools to navigate those spaces that you just mentioned regarding those conversations. So I pay respect to them, and I pay respect to community and elders, past, present, and emerging. So thank you for having me, and also for Living and Learning Pakenham Incorporated for coming up with this beautiful concept.
You're absolutely welcome. And everything you've just said just strikes a chord with me. So thank you. So just in terms of Women Won't Be Silent and why this conversation is important, where did you find your voice?
When I was little, my mum and dad have actually told me that I didn't speak until I was 3 years old. I didn't, yeah.
I was the same. I never spoke for a long time, and when I did, people were like, oh my gosh.
For us, I don't know why. My mum, I think, probably thought I had some kind of a speech impediment, but I think I just was waiting for the right time to speak, and when I did, like, right, that's it. I'm speaking now, and no one can tell me when to stop talking. So in the literal sense, I found my real voice when I was 3, and when I actually spoke, and my parents were amazed that there was actually their fears had been sort of settled, knowing that there wasn't actually anything maybe mentally or physically or audically, any problems that may arise from raising a young daughter. But when it comes to this space, in terms of women having voices, but also that voice in relation to racism, the voice has always been inside of me. Because it was when we came to Australia back in 1988 that did I ever even realize what racism was and what it meant and how that feeling was. So when I was young and we were actually, I wouldn't say ostracized, because people still played with us in the school, but I think we were probably vilified, and we were picked on, we were bullied by those who probably in their minds thought that they were more supreme than ourselves, for whatever reason that may be. It could be our skin color, hair color, it could be just what we wore to school. And back then, our school didn't have a uniform. It has now, but I didn't really understand the notion that I was actually being bullied or someone was being racist against me. All I knew was that feeling was, this is just new. I've never experienced this before, because I've always been with my people in the Philippines. So in that time, I remember someone saying something to me, and I thought, I don't know what that means. I really don't know what that means. So I just used a reply that was familiar to me, and the term, I don't know if I can use this term, you might have to edit it afterwards. But, we actually had chocolates in the shape of M&Ms in the Philippines. They were called nips, N-I-P-S. And someone had called me a nip here when I was young. So I looked at them and I didn't know how to put two and two together, and I just said, well, you're an M&M. Like, I don't understand. What are you? I don't know. And it wasn't until I realized that they were actually making fun of me that I just said what I said, and I always just had a voice, whatever that meant at the time. I really didn't even know that I was standing up for myself. All I knew was that, excuse me, that's not how we treat people, because I grew up in a community that we're all the same people, and we all spoke the same language. We were in an environment that was filled with family and love and playfulness and imagination, because we didn't have many things around us. So we were forced to not only be in love with the people we were with, but be in love with the environment that we were growing up in.
Absolutely. I remember when we first moved to Australia, and we were the only family of colour in the whole neighbourhood. This was the late 70s, and at primary school they had like a buddy system where you'd get buddied up with an older person, a year 6. And I can remember one boy coming up and saying, "You speak English really well." What do you mean? We speak English in New Zealand.
English full stop.
So that was certainly a very interesting moment in time, but you learn to sort of get past it and work your way through the experiences and that as a young kid.
Hey.
Yeah.
I still get that today.
Yeah.
This day and age in 2022, people say, "Hey, you speak English really well."
Yeah.
I'm like, and in my mind, I think I'm just going to put you in a basket where I have to just put aside any of my anger and any of my correction alignment. I'm just going to put that aside for a minute, and I'm going to pretend that you are coming from a place of innocence.
Yeah.
Because it allows me to then sit back and understand other people's understanding of differences. I think that's the biggest lesson for me that I've learned when it comes to dealing with racism, and even in growing up in Australia, you know, because Australians themselves don't even know what the culture is here. And the oldest living culture in the world is sitting there fighting for their rights in their very own land. So I can understand that that disparity, that split of two worlds. So yeah, but for me, I always think you cannot teach those who are not willing to learn, and you cannot speak to those who are not willing to listen. You must have an audience willing to accept your information and that they are ready for it. So, and that's probably for me, even in friendships, you know, I have friends who I can't have these conversations with yet, because I know that, you know, I can speak to them for 12 hours and we can have, you know, a weekend away. But really, my words won't mean anything because they haven't been on their own journey about it. They haven't done their own homework, you know, and it is not always our duties as a person of colour to teach. It is not always our duty to explain. But it is our duty just to be who we are. And if people don't like it, that's okay. There's a door and you can walk out. And if they like it, well, guess what? I cook really good food. You are welcome on my table, and you can come and eat with my family and those I love.
You'll have to come to a hangi.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
So do you want to just, you can pick any timeline in your life, how you identify yourself and your journey, and whether anything has impacted the way you are today, and who has inspired you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, your first question before was actually about Lisa Chambers. And, you know, Lisa and I, we haven't spoken in a long time now. I think she's actually moved away. She's gone on a different path, different career path. But if she's still in the business, I haven't spoken to her. However, I do note her as someone who probably instigated a certain moment in my life when it came to my other love. Well, my first love, actually, which was acting. And the reason why that was is because she opened up thoughts and processes for me in the acting world that opened the door for self-love. You know, it opened the door to allow me to understand who I was as a person, but also to continue the journey, not just for that workshop or not just for the next acting gig that I get, but how I can marry it into my own personal world and life and the way I go about my being, you know, how I interact with my friends, how I interact with my family, how I interact at work, you know, and the truth telling that I say about myself and who I am. So yes, Lisa played a really big role at the time because she was my first teacher, but I've also had many others after her. And what I can say is that acting and the fundamentals of learning about yourself in there, that self-discovery, that self-development that happens because of it, whether by accident or on purpose, that probably is what shapes me about who I am. So when we talk about how do I identify, yes, you know, I guess the obvious things would be that I identify as female. I was born a female. I identify as a she or a them, because in my native tongue, there is actually no pronouns for he or she. So I also identify as them. However, you know, she is usually the word mostly used if you're speaking English. So first it's gender, and then for me it's about internal. So yes, people talk about, you know, what's your sexual orientation, or how do you identify as this or that. But for me, after you speak about, okay, well, I identify as female, and it's almost needs a full stop right there. Just the fact that I identify as female. You know, when you talk about intersectionality, yes, you've got the race and you've got the gender, but just being female on its own, for me, there's already so much introspectiveness that I have to do, because I identify as a mother as well. I identify as a wife. I identify as a business owner. I identify as an actor. So there's so many facets. So my story of intersectionality is actually quite different, as it should be, to everyone else's story of intersectionality. Defining how I identify, the first thing that would come out of my mouth is that I am a proud Filipino woman. And that almost requires a full stop right there. So yeah, I'm a proud Filipino woman. And I spent most of my life on a land that has been stolen from its First Nations people. I'm raising children who I hope that by the time they get to my age, that there won't be a fight anymore, that it's understood. So a lot of that, when you extrapolate it and really pull it back to different sort of orange segments, it's all as one, but at the same time, because each one actually represents a different a different part of who I could be or who I am, but also people's interpretation of who I am is also different. So I also clock that every time, because my friends view me different to my mum and dad, you know, but also my workmate view me differently to my children. So yeah, well, I mean, I know that was a very long answer to identifying myself, but yeah, if I had to pick a time, it would be the Lisa Chambers moment back in 2004 when I did that course in acting for the first time, which was probably a long time coming, because I had been wanting to do it for a long time but just never did. Don't know what stopped me. Probably felt like I was going to get on a plane, go to Hollywood, and it was just going to be magic, but that's not how it works.
So you have been to Hollywood, yeah?
Well, I haven't been there, but I've been there to visit. I haven't been there to film. That's the dream, to go there to film, you know, to do the movies and get into a really strong character development with writers and directors and be part of the process. You know, that's the part I really love most. I love the process. I love getting to know the cast and the crew and the writers and the directors and their vision and making that come to life for them. The audition process, so many times as an actor, you always feel like it's about your nerves and your nervousness and how do you get over it. But in actual fact, everyone in that room just wants you to be awesome. They just want you to be the right person so that they don't need to see anyone else.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's almost like you do just want to do your best. But there's also, again, if I brought it back to our racism topic, you know, that's partially probably what's held me back a little bit, you know, inadvertently and probably subconsciously, because I never really saw representation of myself in TV, in movies, in anything, probably only in the last 5 years, if I'm being realistic. Even Wonder Woman, you know, Gal Gadot is probably one of the first women who is not of a Caucasian descent cast in any major Hollywood superhero film, you know. So, and even that in her own kind of way of intersectionality, that was really frowned upon as well because of other cultures not accepting what she identified as. And that, you know, so there's all these other issues. But now, even in audition slips or casting processes, you know, they use all of these words, these magical words that talk about inclusion and diversity and ethnicities and different groups. And you know what? I just think that if you just based it on people's capability and skill set, you probably get really wonderful actors. You will, and it's okay for Cinderella not to have blonde hair. You know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There really isn't. But I just feel that it's okay for, it's like Moana, for example. Moana is a beautiful Disney character. You know, she has curly hair, she has dark skin, she's full of heart, she's connected to the sea. And thank God they made a decision to make her look like that, because that story just wouldn't have been strong without it. But would the story be the same if Rapunzel's hair was black? Would the story still have its same meaning? I would say yes. I would say yes. But it was released at a time that society was not ready for that story to be told that way. So it brings me back to that. People have to be accepting and willing to listen to the knowledge, to accept that learning, to say, oh, okay. Because it would have been shocking. You know, it wouldn't have been nice to see a princess who had dark hair and dark skin at the time stuck in a tower being rescued. You know, but even the idea of being rescued by a prince, they're moving away so much for that. And I know that we're on a Disney theme at the moment. I don't know why I went there, but I think it's about that damsel in distress syndrome that I'm talking about, and the acting sort of relationship and the thematics that sits under that. So Frozen as an example, yes, we're still talking about blonde hair and blue eyes and, you know, etc. I do think about the connection to the sisterhood rather than a prince rescuing them, but still Anna gets rescued by Kristoff. So anyway, there's still that prince connection. But there is Encanto, and Encanto and Coco as well. And they're so fresh in my mind because I've got young kids, you know, and this is what we watch. So I'm still really choosy about what I expose them to, but at the same time, it's out of my control as well. Because I can't tell them not to watch certain things that their friends are saying, oh, we should watch this together, or we should go to the movies and watch this. But Encanto is a very family-oriented magical experience, you know, and my daughter actually said, oh, she kind of reminds me of me, Mum. You know, she kind of, and that's awesome, because there's no way when I was her age, I was in the Philippines at the time and I was 7, I could look at a screen that was not made in the Philippines and say, gee, that person reminds me of me. I can be her when I grow up. I see it in Filipino movies, but I don't see it here. Even until today, I don't see it here. I can't name one Filipino woman, pure Filipino woman, that has made that impact. Maybe the girl from, what's her name? Melanie. She was from Winners and Losers. Melanie something. She's half Filipino. But she's the only one really, but still she's also a halfie and could pass for Caucasian.
In terms of your career and where you are at this point in your life, has this made you more social justice minded, or has it always been there?
You know, I've never really considered that what I do was for social justice. And then when people mention it, even when I thought about the concept of social justice, it does just come naturally to me because it's a physical reaction. It's almost just this requirement for my body to say, well, hang on, that's not right. You know, it's really not right. And it probably stems from really strong maternal queens that raised me, you know, like my mother and my grandmother, who are just such fierce women, and will just not take any BS from people, and they will call it out. Because I grew up in an environment where truth telling wasn't punished. You know, truth telling was actually the key to freedom. And that if you didn't say it in the way that it happened, or the way that you experienced that it happened, then you're actually in more trouble. That's how. So when I watch my mum be my mum, and I watch my grandma be my grandma, they probably were showing me and teaching me ways of social justice and what that meant to be a female without me even knowing. So the representation of myself to myself today, though it may appear that it is under the banner of social justice, it actually is just because that's what's natural to me. It's almost this, they always say that we have a default, we have a comfortable zone that we exist in as people. And each person's comfortable zone is different. And I think my comfortable zone is to be able to say it as I see it, call a spade, and there you don't get you kind of get what you get and you don't get upset like with me. So if you're going to be my friend, you've got to expect honesty, you got to expect truth. And if you don't like that, that's okay. Again, we have a few doors that you can walk out of.
During my career, I've noticed going through the practical steps to discussing race. I remember bringing up the discussion about George Floyd and the unfolding public outcry and trying to navigate that difficult conversation with clarity, compassion and openness. I found discussing racism in the workplace using positive and persistent pressure to enable honest dialogue quite challenging. To be completely honest, I found people just didn't want to talk about it. They would prefer to sweep it under the carpet.
I think people do want to talk about it, but I think they don't want to action it.
Yeah.
They don't want to pick up the shovel and start paving new pathways. You know, they don't want to do that. And I think that if they include themselves in the conversation, then they're all of a sudden liable and responsible to make change. So I think that's the reason why people tend to put it to the side and say, oh, I don't know if I want to really talk about this because I don't want to make any promises that I can't keep. I think it's the inability or the lack of planning in regards to the action plan that they're going to take to tackle it. We can say what we want. They can talk about till the cows come home. But at the end of the day, if there's no actions to it, like National Reconciliation Week this year's theme is Be Brave, Make Change. But how much bravery is actually happening in politics? How much bravery is actually happening when it comes to societal changes? You know, and the bravery that I ask for with the people I work with and that, you know, with the employees and staff of the clientele that we deal with, both government and corporate organizations, is bravery and courage to have your own personal reconciliation action plan, to say, what am I going to do, not just for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but any person of colour? How do I measure what they could be going through compared to what I am and who I am, and not exist in a place of ignorance, not exist in a place of you are going to dictate what happens to everybody else because you view yourself to be in a place of supremacy. So there is, for me, the biggest question about politics is that who gets to make decisions for the different voices? And I do feel that there is a dictatorship of inclusiveness. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, who defines diversity? Who defines inclusion? You know, who actually says that we want to be included in the first place, you know? So it's almost this, why is it diverse when minority is majority? So it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit like, I do exist in a space of questions a lot, and it makes it for good conversations. And sometimes it creates change, and other times there is that confused look on people's faces. And you just kind of got to say, all right, well, I said my piece and you're obviously not the right person. So I'm going to move on and stop talking.
I love that. Minority is majority.
Hey, I'm going to wind it up and ask a final question. If you knew back then what you know now, what would you say to your younger self just in regards to the topic we're talking about, racism?
I would say that don't be fearful that there is no representation of yourself anywhere right now, because you will be the change that you seek. That would be the advice in that instance. Second is prepare yourself for motherhood, Fatima, because you don't know what's coming. You do not know what's coming. Sleep lots now, right? So that's the motherhood part. And I would say that it is okay to prioritize yourself first, that it is okay to be selfish, and it is okay to say no, because not everything that is happening around you is your responsibility. So I would say that those would probably be the three things I would say to my younger self. But the mostly, which is off, I probably had this anyway when I was younger from my mum and my grandma, was about the truth telling. You know, that truth always finds its way out. It's actually in Tagalog. My mum says it in Tagalog to me. And I'm trying to find a way to shorten it because I was thinking of creating some kind of artwork to get into a tattoo of it, because it really has paved the pathway for me about who I am today. And it's about true. So it translates to the truth is like water. That no matter where you might confine it, if there is a crack, it'll always find its way out. And when it's said in Tagalog, it's almost like when you are dealing with people who are deceitful, or if you're dealing with people who are untruthful, you must always just remain true to yourself and to whatever story you've got, because eventually it will come out anyway, and you will be the victor, because you were always honest. So I would always say that to myself. Just listen to your gut, listen to your heart, you know, and the friends you have now, hold on to them, you know, because they're going to be there from now until, and they actually are. So I would definitely tell that to myself as well.
They're fine words, and definitely words to take away. Fatima, I would like to thank you for today's podcast. I highly enjoyed the matter and discussing with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Donna. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the podcast series. I'll be listening to you however often it comes out, because it is important to hear other people's viewpoints, other women's viewpoints, other women's stories of racism, and how it actually impacts you as a person, but it also empowers you at the same time. So I think that that's the magic in all of this, the empowerment that comes with it, and the superpower you get given when people are being racist towards you, because you can't learn that anywhere else. You got to learn that on the job, if you know what I mean. So yeah, but thank you so much, and I am so proud to say that I'm part of this series, and I can't wait to hear it back and also listen to the others that have already been recorded, but the future ones that are coming as well. So thank you to you and your team, Donna.
It was such an honour talking to Fatima and hearing her story about Women Won't Be Silent. Let's build a resume that doesn't simply tell a story, but to have a purpose. My name is Donna, and this podcast is proudly brought to you by Living and Learning Pakenham and Wells Springs for Women, and the Victorian Government's initiative to address racism and how to tackle it on a day-to-day basis. Louisa O'Donoghue said, "We are all here now, and we have to solve our differences and live together as Australians. I will use the title you have honoured me with to bring Australian people together. Together, we can build a remarkable country, the envy of the rest of the world."